All right, welcome friends. Welcome to my presentation, which is a book study on Without Buddha, I Cannot Be a Christian by me. This is what I'll share today, why I read the book, a bit about the author. And the book is quite long, so it's one of the better Christian books I've read. So I will talk about three things that the author talks about with regards to how he learned from Buddhism and applied it to his Christian practice, non-duality, emptiness, and impermanence. So these three parts are the discussion parts. And then at the end, there'll be Q&A. The Q&A won't be recorded, so you can ask any questions you want. So I'd like to encourage everyone to keep an open mind. And if you have questions, put them in the chat. I will address them at the end to avoid breaking up. But in each section, it will go like this. We will have a discussion. We'll read a passage from the book, and then at the end of the passage reading, we'll have a discussion. So if you have questions, you can put it, you can ask in the discussion. So my friend, who is a PhD candidate in theology, he saw an Instagram post I posted on the Dhammapada where I reflected on how it was very interesting. When I read the Dhammapada, it reminded me of the book of Proverbs from the Bible. And in my previous presentation in April, where I talked about the surprising similarities and distinct differences between Buddhism and Christianity, played a little game where we played, is it Dhammapada or Proverbs? So that was a fun game. So he suggested I read this book. So I bought it and read it and love it. And I thought I'll share it with you guys. So the author, he used to be a former Catholic priest, and then later he changed job and became a theology professor. And he's a husband to a Buddhist wife. So I think when they both got married, they were both Catholics. But later on, his wife converted to becoming from a Catholic to a Buddhist. And he was very influenced by her faith, even though he still identifies as Christian. So for my Buddhist friends, Christians and Catholics are the same. Catholics are Christians, but Protestants and Catholics have a complicated history. So I won't go into that in this talk, but Catholics are Christians. So yeah. Okay, so the first discussion is non-duality. So we need audience interaction. So I hope everyone can go once. Even if you don't know, you can say don't know, I'll pass. So the question is, two questions. What is non-duality? One. And what is an example, whether in real life or in the Buddhist sutras or in your learning of this. So what I'll do is I'll copy this question, put it in a group chat. Okay, so this is the interaction session. So anyone can share. I will share last or first. Okay, I'll let you all share first. If you all have nothing to say, then I'll say. So anyone can unmute and share. Before I share a passage from the book about his thoughts on non-duality, what do you understand non-duality to be? You can say one word, one sentence, or a paragraph, and then if you have an example for the Christians in this room or the non-Buddhists, or those who might be new to the faith, who might not know what non-duality is. So please.
I can go. From what I understand, I asked a lot of monks about this. They say basically the jhanas where there's one-pointedness, then the mind is only in one. There's no more subject-object duality. So this is basically the only place where there's non-dual inside the absorptions. But from what I gathered from other kind of traditions, especially outside Theravada, they can say that there's non-duality is part of it can be experienced in daily life as well. So that one is another level. I don't know what it means. Can't really find it much in Theravada.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Anyone else? Okay, I'll give my understanding. So I'm very new to the Buddhist faith, so I'll share my lay person's understanding. So I had a conversation with Venerable Tien Sing once. So she asked me, "Are you half a Buddhist or half a Christian?" So I said, Venerable Tien Sing, I think I'm 100% Buddhist and 100% Christian. So there's a non-duality. I feel like it's hard for people to understand, so I don't actually go around to explain, because I think to me, the concept of non-duality separate to my faith or my blended faith is already very hard to understand. It is splitting my brain. So yeah, so I think whenever I encounter things that are non-dual, it's a bit hard to understand, because in Singapore, or at least in the world maybe, things are always in binaries, right? Like male or female, or like hot or cold, or white or black. But actually, if you think about it, like white or black usually exists in a spectrum. There's a lot of gray. So how will you know that the gray is more white or black? How will you know the hot and cold, which are So I'm still learning. So that's my basic understanding of non-duality. Basically, it's very cheap. I'm still learning. It's very hard to understand. Yes, so I'd like to hear from all of you so that we can learn from each other. How about you, Ming? What do you think?
No comment. It's
Okay.
not something I'm familiar with in Theravada.
Oh, okay, I see. So it's like what Bande says, it's not common. That's all right.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. That's also a comment. No comment. Anybody else? Okay, so Lionel said in the comment, the chat box, I think maybe in Mahayana Buddhism, there is a concept of two truths, subjective truth and absolute truth of emptiness. Thank you, Lionel. So for those who are not Buddhists here, there are a few schools of Buddhism. One is Mahayana school and one is Theravada school. Subjective truth and absolute truth of emptiness. Okay. Okay, thank you. I don't really understand, but interesting. Anyone else?
I'm not sure if this is what they mean, but there is like, so it's like, for example, this is dependent on like, you know, that's dependent on origination, right? There's like some subjective is, oh, this is this factor wouldn't exist without the presence of another, whereas absolute truth is like, you know, there are some things that will never be false, like regardless of whatever factors exist or not, will always be there. Like, for example, like the idea that there is no self, the idea that there is impermanence, all of this, etc., etc. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the purpose of today's discussion is not to, I mean, it will be good to know the things that are correct, but I think it's a place where you can discuss and then you can ask more learned people like the Sangha about stuff and then you can learn more or consult books or the sutras. Yeah. Oh, somebody said, okay, thank you, Nani. Nagarjuna, who is an Indian Buddhist philosopher, also mentioned something about mundane or worldly truth and ultimate or dharmic truth. He says they are not at odds and neither is superior to the other. We need to know both truths to live a good life. Oh, thank you. Interesting. Yeah. So interesting. So yeah, there is the contrast between mundane or like stuff in the world, secular world, and the ultimate dharmic truth, which is in the what the Buddha taught, right? They're not at odds. Yeah, because I do agree. I think I heard somewhere someone said that the Dharma is in everywhere. Is it in the Dhammapada? I think it says truth is everywhere, Dharma is everywhere. So they're not at odds and neither is superior to the other. We need to know both truths to live a good life. Yes, I think that's true. Anyone else? Okay, I realize opening with non-duality is quite. Oh yes, please go.
The first time I experienced the concept of non-duality was, I think, in physics. Physics O level. More of the duality, but I see it as a non-duality. It is said that when particles move slowly, then it's the particulate nature of matter. But as the particle speeds up, it moves from its particulate nature into a wave nature. So in essence, all of us have the particulate nature and the wave matter. That's why light by itself moving at such a fast speed, usually it is seen as, based on Young's experiment, is seen as wave. That's why there's all this slit experiment, if you remember. But if you do it by the Planck's experiment, then it's photons and its particulate nature. But in essence, it is the same thing depending on how you view at it. So the physicists see it as the duality of existence, but in essence, it is actually non-duality because it is still the same matter depending on where you are looking at. They are doing this slit experiment, then the wave theory comes in. They are doing the Planck's experiment, then the particulate nature stays in. It is still the same thing. That is the physicist interpretation. My more so-called philosophical exposure to the non-duality was more in the Heart Sutra. And the key word in the Heart Sutra was interdependence. Because of interdependence, that is why we exist. We exist because of our parents, because of the of the constant gravitational G force. So if the G in the gravitational theory change, we do not exist. So many matters. So we exist because there were some dust particles gathering, and then there was Earth, and yes, we are all dust particles, so to speak. We exist because of many factors, and without just one factor, we are not here today. That is what the Heart Sutra saying, that everything is interdependent. Then as I get more exposed to the Theravadan has its version of non-duality. It is more in the concept. Of course, the Mahayanis in Heart Sutra, they talk about emptiness. The Theravadans in Ajahn Chah's exposition of it, he also talked of emptiness. That means there is no existence of left and right, or right or wrong. You take a stick, there's left, there's right. You chop off the left side still exists. And there's left and right. You chop off the right side, then there's still the left and right. And then it never ends. So that is the other concept, the other way of looking at emptiness. And emptiness is the Buddhist exposition of non-duality. So three ways of looking at it. My A-level way, the physicist view, the Heart Sutra Mahayanist view, and Ajahn Chah's more Theravadan view. Thank you.
Charles. Thank you, Charles. When you talked about the physics way, I saw our in-house physicist laughing. Dropping, do you have anything you want to say about this, about physics?
I'm not only physicist.
Oh, sorry.
One day is also used to be a physicist. Yes, but
Oh,
yeah, it's correct.
It's correct? Mm.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the Heart Sutra, Charles, because I was having a conversation also with Venerable Jianxing. I said, can you explain to me why emptiness is form and form is emptiness, right? I mean, we did the Chinese version. So she talked about E equals to mc squared, and how light and matter are the same. I was like, wow, okay, very cheap, but yes. Anyway, moving along, does anyone else have any last thing to say before I share the extract from the book about what you understand? So the reason why we're doing this, right, is so that you have a better, so we all share our thoughts on what non-duality is, and then I'll show you what the author shared his thoughts are. So as I'll give you some time, the first two people who can read I'll choose Xu and Li Hui. So you take turns, all right? It's quite long. So Xu can read the first slide, Li Hui can read the second slide, then Xu can read the third slide, and Li Hui can read the fourth slide until it's completed. So are you ready, Xu and Li Hui? Please unmute yourself.
Okay.
Thank you for being my volunteers. Okay, so let's read the passage. Okay, okay, let's go. Yeah, just the words in black at the bottom on the Christianity. Xu, please.
Christianity, throughout most of its history, because of its historical conditioning, not because of its inherent nature, has been plagued with the problem of dualism.
Li Hui.
My dictionary defines dualism as a state in which something has two distinct parts or aspects, which are often opposites.
My own simplistic definition would be, dualism results when we make necessary distinctions, then take those distinctions too seriously.
We turn those distinctions into dividing lines rather than connecting lines. We use them as no trespassing line signs.
We not only distinguish, we separate, and the separation usually leads to ranking. One side is superior to and dominant over the other.
Thus, we have the dualism of matter and spirit, east and west, nature and history, male and female, God and the world.
Here's our problem, I think. We Christians, we're not the only religion to do this, have distinguished God and the world, or the infinite and the finite.
Such distinctions are right and proper, indeed necessary, but then we've made much too much of our neat distinctions. we've made these distinctions too clear to define.
We have so insisted on the infinite distance between God and the world that we've ended up not with God and creatures on two ends of the same playing field, but in two different stadiums.
We have so stressed how different, how beyond God is from creatures that our attempts to connect the two turn out to be contrived or artificial or partial or unequal.
That's the problem with dualism. It so stresses the difference between two realities. It so separates them that it cannot then get them back together again and show how.
The two belong together, complement each other, need each other, form a genuine relationship with each other.
That's it. That's the crux of the problem. Christian dualism has so exaggerated the difference between God and the world that it cannot really show how the two form a unity.
Of course, what I have summed up in these pages does not represent all of Christian tradition, experience, and even Christian theology.
But it does echo the dominant voices and reflect the prevailing images, not only in popular Christian beliefs, but in much of the standard teaching of Christian churches.
So much of Christian belief and spirituality is burdened with what I have called the dualism between God and us.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Sue and Li Hui, for your reading. So now I'd like to open for comment. So I'll comment first, all right? So I think just to summarize, the passage talks about how in mainstream Christian teaching, there's a difference between God and humans, and in theological words, not words, terms, some people call it transcendence and immanence. So transcendence is God is far away from us, whereas immanence is God is around us. And I think because, maybe not because, but dualism is a trend. I won't say in just Christianity, it's just that this book is focused on that, but there is always a separation. So like in the beginning, they said that one is superior to the other, right? So I mean, often I have seen in my experience with the churches I was with, they always thought they had a superior religion. And I'm like, so now looking back, I realize it's quite arrogant, but they can't see it because they are blinded by the way they have been taught. And then there is good and there's bad, but sometimes I think life is complicated, right? So it's not so clear cut. And I think when we appreciate that, like God is everywhere, immanent and transcendence are not separate concepts, right? If God is in each of us, in each person, we should respect every person because they're all made in the image and likeness of God. And if it's true that the Dhamma is everywhere, or like if God is everywhere, then to me, there is no contradiction when somebody, let's say, asks me about my two like blended faiths, because yeah, if everywhere is Dhamma, I can learn from everyone and anything. And if God's everywhere, I should also respect and learn from everyone and anything. It's just that I think it's a bit hard to grasp. So yeah, so for the passage earlier, before I move on to the next part, do you have any comments or any thoughts or any questions? Because usually MDC is quite a Buddhist talk, so I realize this book is a little bit Christian. So if you've got any questions, I'm not a theologian or a pastor, but I can try and answer some questions. Yeah, so I'll give us a minute to think. You can type in the group chat, so I drink some water. Okay, if no, I'll move on. Oh yes, you want to say something?
Yeah, but like what you say, right? Even till today, you still get a lot of these evangelists knocking on your doors. And I guess the selling point is always that you are separate from God. Therefore, you need to get back to God. So like you say, it's very prevalent in that sense, this separation. But what I find really, something which I always think that people who believe in God don't think enough about is like the Muslim idea of God. The reason why they do not put God in any form, is because they have this way of thinking that God is beyond what the human mind is able to fathom. You cannot think of God in that limited whatever perceptions, conceptions, whatever you can create it with your mind. It is beyond that. And I find this to be quite interesting because similarly, when you ask the Buddha, what is Nibbana? What is Nibbana, right? It's pretty much, don't go there. Yeah, you can only talk of what it's not, but not what it is. Yeah. And that sort of then back to the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, that sort of thinking. So yeah. That's where I think that the Christian faith has problems with. They draw it too clearly. You are not, you are separate. Therefore, you accept grace to be with, to go there. Yeah.
Thank you. That's very interesting for sure, Ming. Yeah. And like the author says, it's not every Christian denomination, just the more popular ones or the mainstream ones. And I see in the chat that Nani has said, I find that the Quakers are one of the most open-minded and least dogmatic Christian denominations. One of their most cherished ideals is egalitarianism, which means that everyone is made in the image of God. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I don't know much about the Quakers, but yeah, it's interesting.
I got some comments.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so it's a common misconception that there's not much that can be said about Nibbana, whereas there's actually some lecture series that can fill a whole book and 30 plus lecture series. But if you read the suttas, the Nibbana is explained quite well. Cessation existence is Nibbana. Nibbana is end of suffering. Nibbana is not irreversible and not able to be far away, highest bliss, and so on. There's so many descriptions about Nibbana, and it's not exactly that ineffable thing that is commonly said. Just that I find people who dabble in this Christianity versus Buddhism thing comparison tend to want to equate God to Nibbana. But from the Buddhist point of view, we would put the Christian God as more some level of a Brahma level. So it's more like the jhanas level. And indeed, jhanas are superhumans, and the Buddha called the bliss of jhana as like the bliss of Nibbana. So it could be very well that those who are not very well versed in the Buddhist doctrine can make the mistake of equating God to Nibbana instead of just God to the jhanas. And what I currently suspect is that a lot of Christian mystics and Christian monks, they might already got to the jhanas level too, which is what they might feel union, a non-duality union with some very blissful states. In our jhanas language, is more like the mind is one with the object. If it's just only have one object, and it's supremely blissful, and it does leads to the Brahma realm. For one who has the attained to jhana, one can be reborn in the Brahma realm. So it basically, you can see as a union with the God level. But the God here I'm using here, of course, is a Buddhist term for Brahma, which is not all powerful, all knowing, and not good, and not immortal.
Thank you, Bante. Yeah, I think I don't want to speak on behalf of Ming, but I think he was talking about the similarities in the conception, because it's ineffable in the sense that you have to experience it to know what Nibbana is. But I think I recognize that there are descriptions. I think I think the Brahma God concept in Buddhism is slightly different from the creator God concept in Christianity. So for me, if you're curious, so I think I understand what Brahma God is, but my conception of the Christian God is slightly different from that. But yeah, thanks for your comment, Bante. And I think just to add on to what you said, yeah, there has been reports, not reports. If you study both, like talk about jhanas and early Christian history, Saint Teresa of Avila, who is a early Catholic nun, in her memoir, she talks about attaining states of bliss and experiencing light in her contemplation that is very similar to jhana. So I haven't actually read her memoir, but I would like to read. So the practice brings the same effect. And I think, was it Meister Eckhart, another Christian Catholic contemplative, when he prays or meditates in very deep concentration states, he also attains similar states. Of course, don't quote me on this, go and read it. But yeah, I'll be reading Saint Teresa of Avila's work soon, because it's interesting how she also has a step-by-step method on how she attained these states of concentration and bliss. And it's very interesting because I have never heard of it until recently when I read more, I think, books that compare the different faiths, and there are similar practices that bring the same states, at least of jhanas or bliss or joy or like light. So that's very interesting to me, because yeah, that's very heartening to know. So one day when I concentrate enough. Yes. Okay, so if no one else like to speak, I'll move on to the second part. I will be asking us what emptiness is. Wow, great question. Oh, today very hard, I realize. Okay, so the question is, what is emptiness and what's an example of emptiness? Let me copy and paste this into the chat so we can all have a nice little discussion this lovely day. So what do you understand to be emptiness, and what's an example? So like I gave an example earlier of the Heart Sutra, which is what Charles talked about when Venerable Jian Xing said that so I'll elaborate a bit because I didn't elaborate just now. So E equals to mc squared, where light, right, equals to mass times the speed of energy equals to mass times the speed of light squared. So her explanation to me, then I was very confused. She said that emptiness is form, meaning that if you think about it, mass is like form, right? Then light is like formless. But if they can be transformed one into the other, so emptiness is form and form. And I was like, oh, interesting. You use physics equation to explain the Heart Sutra to me. Cool. So that's why I understand. Anyone has any thoughts? If you don't, I'll move on. But I'll give you some time to think, or you can type in the chat also. Whether yes.
Emptiness in the Theravada doctrine means empty of self. One of the suttas says the world is empty. Empty of what? Empty of self. It's basically one way to see emptiness is to see impermanence. And what is impermanent? Is it satisfactory or unsatisfactory? Unsatisfactory. And what is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and subject to change? Is it fit to be regarded as self? And not fit to be regarded as self. And we can analyze all phenomena of the world one by one. Usually the Buddha used the 5 aggregates or the 6 sense bases to analyze all these things. And 5 aggregates means the body, feeling, perception, volitional formation, and consciousness. These are the things that we usually take to be as self. Whereas the 6 sense bases, they are the 5 physical sense bases plus the mind. And these 6 sense bases are basically how we interact and know the world. This is basically all what we are ever exposed to. All that we can know is within these 6 sense bases, and they are all still not self. And so, emptiness is more like a right view level first, to be able to see, get in touch in the back of the mind. And then when we can practice until to get to the jhanas, then you can practice the vipassana to be able to see directly impermanence, suffering, and not self-nature of all things. Then we can, then one would be able to say that that is realization of emptiness. But it's not just one time, it's seeing many times, then the realization might ripen. Whereas, and also usually emptiness is usually said to be unique to Buddhism, at least the non-self doctrine. If it's transposed to other religion, I think there will be different kind of idea from not self. They might just use something and that's empty, and maybe they equate to nothingness or something. But it's from the early Buddhist point of view, at least it just means everything is not self or not self, including nothingness, including nibbana.
Thank you, Bante. So I'll read from the chat. Nani says, emptiness means that conditioned phenomena are empty of essential quality. There is no such thing as an innate permanent quality. And Lionel continues to say that dependent origination, if there is no ignorance, then after many, many, many conditions and causes, there won't be birth and death. And Nani continues to say, replying to emptiness means that, for example, our personalities are constantly changing. There is no stable identity. Thank you for your contributions. And it's interesting what Bati said, because I think later I'll comment, and also I think it's also in the text that I will be reading. Okay, anyone else want to comment on what their thoughts on emptiness is? Give another minute before I read the passage.
Oh, maybe I can give an example.
Thank you, Li Hui.
This was probably when I was a HO, and then it was during one of my GS course, that means a surgical core. And then I think I was scrambling around, because when you're in a surgical team, you usually need a lot of gel, because you need to like do a lot of digital rectal examination. So I think during that call, I was like scrambling around trying to look for a proctoscope, which is something that you use to look into the buttock, and then you need a gel. So usually, right, as a HO, your job is to just make sure that you have all this in your bag so that you're ready. But I think that time we ran out of it. So I was like scrambling around trying to find a proctoscope and then trying to find a gel. And then I don't know why, I don't know if it was at that point or after the call, then I realized, I think I found it eventually, but I was thinking in the outside world, you know, like this thing wouldn't hold so much importance to other people as it would to me now in this situation. Like in this moment, on this day, for this patient, this proctoscope and the gel is extremely important. But then for this thing that is like in the outside world where people don't even know what it is, then it's not, you know. Yeah, then I just felt like maybe this was what an example of emptiness could be. It's like the purpose is really conditional. Yeah.
Wow.
Funny example that I still remember. I still was like, oh my goodness, like people outside don't even know what this is, you know. Then here I'm like so stressed trying to find.
So interesting. You should compile a list of medical metaphors to relate to Buddhism. I remember Charles had a metaphor about the diagnosis and the prognosis, and then it was related to the Four Noble Truths. So you can compile a book and then all the M1s what it is. But thank you for sharing. I think it's very interesting to hear your analogy on Okay. So that is true. Very interesting. So if no one else, I will read the passage, the second passage. And you see, okay, so let me on emptiness. So this is I think in his diaries. So he was reflecting on what he learned recently. This is what Rafner talks about as mystery. Recently I read a comparison by Leo Lefebvre in Revelation, the Religions and Violence, on the similarities of Rafner's understanding of mystery and Masao Abe's notion of emptiness or groundlessness. For both of them, to feel the reality of mystery or sunyata means to let go of self, to trust totally in what both of them call infinite openness. Openness to what? To what's going on right now, in the trust that what is going on is what I am a part of and what will sustain and lead me moment by moment. Only moment by moment. There are no grand visions promised here. Just a mindful trusting of each moment as it comes, with what it contains, with its confusion or inspiration, with its joy or horror, with its hope or despair. Whatever that is there, this suchness right now is the breath of the spirit, the power of mystery, the connectedness of emptiness. So basically, in this passage, it's very long, so I won't put the whole thing. You might fall asleep, but I thought it was very interesting that a Catholic would compare God, like the Christian creator God, to emptiness. So I haven't completely made sense of it yet, but I thought it was. So he has this very long and elaborate argument on why sunyata is similar to God. So I don't know whether he's using it as a metaphor or as a equivalent. And what Bhante said, yeah, I think we should be careful on drawing direct parallels between religions. But I thought it was very interesting that I think suchness was a word that Thich Nhat Hanh used, I believe. So he was quoting Thich Nhat Hanh and using the word suchness because I think it's hard to translate sunyata. And the concept as well. So yeah, so I thought that was an interesting thing to share, and got to read the whole thing, the whole chapter to be able to properly appreciate it. But yeah, do you all have any thoughts or questions or comments? Okay, if not, okay, I'll give you all time. Let me look at who was the volunteer for the last passage. Hui Hui and Zhuo Bing. Okay, so so for the last passage, Hui Hui and Zhuo Bing can take turns to read after we have discussed the last concept. Okay, so we can take turns. I will prompt you guys. So if no one has any comments, I'll move on to the last discussion topic, which is impermanence. Oh, very heavy today. Okay, so audience interaction, please. So what is impermanence? An example. I think some of us covered part of it just now, as we talked about. Put it in the group chat. As we talked about emptiness, I think Bhante talked about how it's linked to impermanence. So I think out of the three concepts for the Christians in this room, probably impermanence is a bit easier to understand than emptiness and non-duality. So I'd like to open to the floor. Anybody would like to share what their understanding of impermanence is? And if you have an example, my example is, today we booked the room in MD6. We're all supposed to be there in person, but things are impermanent. I am sick, so I am doing this on Zoom. But I was gonna like be sick and cough into MD6, but I had a conversation with Li Hui and we decided that it's better to do it on Zoom. So things change. It's like just now it was raining and now it's not raining. So things change. Okay, this is my very basic layperson understanding of impermanence and the two examples. Okay, over to you guys. What do you understand impermanence to be, and if you have examples, whether Buddhist from the scriptures or in your own personal life? And yes, you can type in the chat if you're shy to speak.
I feel that impermanence contributes to understanding of non-duality and emptiness. It's because things change. It's because matter, the conditions for different types of matter to exist, to take on different properties would differ over time. There's different lengths of duration for different seasons, for example. And that's why the makeup of every matter does not have a permanent, essential, like non-changing quality, right? So I've just thought this is actually quite useful to also look at the Buddha's teachings as a response to what was happening during his time, where the caste system was very ingrained into people. It's like you are born into this family, you are untouchable. You cannot ever be that person that would offer the harvest on the altar in the temple. Or people might get really upset about how maybe they could never get out of their social status. And I think what the Buddha taught was really in response to a lot of suffering that he was observing at that time. And for me to be able to see the function of that teaching of impermanence helps me appreciate that. Not to be too overjoyed to the extent of ecstasy when good things happen, but also not to be like rolling in despair because things always change.
Thank you, Hui Hui. I appreciate that. That was a very interesting comment. And I'll read what Lionel said in the chat. Lionel says, all things are not set in stone and will eventually end when the conditions causing them to begin or cause them to exist, cease to exist, or themselves end. New conditions and causes also influence a factor to change over and over again until it is no longer the same thing. Hence, nothing is ever set in stone and nothing is permanent. As a person who studied material science and engineering at NUS, stone and diamonds, they all are not permanent, by the way. Diamonds are not forever. So that's just a marketing tactic. Sorry, I just had to comment, all right. But diamonds are not forever. They're not permanent. They're impermanent too. You just need enough force and pressure and heat. Anybody else has any comments on what was the question? What is impermanence? Any examples before we read the last? So just so that you know, we'll read the last passage and then that's it. Like that's and then we'll have Q&A. It's a short talk because I think the book is a bit heavy. So if I go through all of it, it will be a lot. So I thought I'll just go through 3 main points. But the last passage is very long, so be prepared. Who was the volunteers dropping and wait to read a bit. Yes, that's why you're alternating. Anyone else has any thoughts on impermanence? Yes, Charles, please go ahead.
I have heard more than 2 or more than 3 very accomplished scholars of Buddhism said that if you're going to just summarize Buddhism into one word, is impermanence. If only you understand impermanence by experience, of course, intellectually and by experience, that is all that you need to do. That is what the whole teaching is about, impermanence. As an example, if you have impermanence, the 3 universal characteristics of anatta, non-self, it is there. The fact that your heart is beating and you're not in control of your heartbeat, that is the fact that you're growing, that is impermanence, and you cannot control your growth. So that impermanence encapsulates anatta also, right? Then impermanence also encapsulates dukkha, the other universal characteristics. Because there's impermanence, there is dissatisfaction, be it a happy kind of dissatisfaction or an unhappy kind of dissatisfaction. Not pure suffering, but it's just dissatisfaction. Sometimes suffering is just the meaning of it is lost in translation. Dukkha may mean more than just suffering. Hence, the 3 universal characteristics is actually captured in impermanence. That is one point. And secondly, impermanence is not something negative. Because of impermanence, that's why you go from a baby to an adult. But then if you think of it in a bad way, because of impermanence, because then you grow an adult to an old person, right? So it depends on how you view it. Again, at what point you view it, that is also emptiness, and that is also part of non-duality. Okay, that's my contribution.
Thank you, Charles. Yeah, just provided the translations imperfect for those who are not familiar, because some of them is the first time here. Anyone else before I move on?
I think Bante.
Yes, Bante, please.
Yes, what Charles says is quite good, in that if one truly understands impermanence and see it with vipassana, then there's no way to put the self as. Usually the self is constructed by wandering thoughts. Then if we just try to see the mind with vipassana, one method that I got from Vadayagachita yesterday and the day before was the open awareness mind practice, which is to observe seeing, then switch to hearing, tasting, smelling, tasting, and touching. So do this again and again, rotate. Then go back to seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. and doing with the mind focus on these five senses again and again. It anchors the mind to the present moment, but the mind will still find things to think about. We think about whether this is boring, this is hard work, what am I talking about? Why am I doing this? And with the observation of the mind, with the anchoring of five senses, the mind becomes settled and calm. And observing the mind, and one can directly see that the mind is very impermanent. One moment think about this, one moment think about that, and sometimes get distracted and not into the rhythm, the schedule. Then one can realize that the mind is also not within our control. Try to see why the mind gets distracted, why the mind gets to here and there. We can see conditionality. Whatever is conditioned is subject to change, because all the conditions, all the things that is links to, that supports the appearance of this thing, when it changes, that thing what the results changes. So this impermanence covers everything, all the mind and matter, whereas it doesn't include nibbana. So in this sense, we can have a bit of differentiation between the Buddhist and Christian kind of doctrine. In Christian doctrine, the soul and God basically are the two things, at least, that are eternal. And those are the things which is still inside the world. And whereas compared to nibbana, is not really of the world. We cannot really personalize nibbana as a person, like what some Christian doctrine has personalized God as a person and as an ineffable thing, a law, like a sort of law of nature kind of thing. That's more of deism kind of view. So this is incomplete understanding of impermanence. Whereas with complete understanding of impermanence, there's no place at all to put the self in. The mind thoughts cannot construct a self with clear seeing of impermanence. That's how practice to seeing impermanence can lead to realization of self.
Thank you, Bhante.
But Bhante, question. So the Christian will back the question, is nibbana permanent?
Yeah, nibbana is the only thing that is not within these three characteristics. Two characteristics. Nibbana is not impermanent, and nibbana is not dissatisfactory. So nibbana is the end of suffering, permanent and still not self.
Thank you. Thank you, Bhante. Okay. So if there's no one else, I will let Dropping and Hui Hui read. Maybe Dropping can read the first slide, then Hui Hui, then you alternate. It's quite long, so please read slowly if you want. Okay, so let's go. Okay, Dropping, please.
Okay. I have to confess that there is an element of my Christian belief, based on my understanding of Jesus, that seems to be at odds with Buddhism, that I can't let go of, so I don't want to cling to it.
It has to do with the affirmation found in all the Abrahamic religions that history is real and that history can be better.
Buddhists, insofar as they find change and impermanence at the root of reality, can be said perhaps to recognize history, insofar as history consists of change.
A Buddhist friend recently gave me a t-shirt that announces, under a smiling Buddha face, impermanence makes everything possible.
But Buddhists don't affirm, at least not as clearly and as centrally as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, that things can change for the better.
For them, as I already put it, history isn't going anywhere, and it doesn't have to.
Because as a Christian, I believe in a divine, a connecting spirit that is up to something in history. I believe that history bears within itself the possibility that does not mean the necessity of improvement.
In other words, I hold the belief that there can be less hatred, less violence, less injustice in the world tomorrow than there is today.
As we heard, if we should ask Buddhists whether emptiness or anti-being is up to anything, they might reply that it is bringing forth ever more awakening among humanity, ever more wisdom and compassion.
But they leave it there. As a Christian, I want to add, and with and through this wisdom and compassion, we can bring about real change in this world.
We can transform social and political structures and so fashion a world in which it will be a little easier for people to attain wisdom and compassion.
Never the final, perfect world, but a different, a better world.
In making this point that the world can improve and be transformed, I have to keep in mind the Buddhist warnings not to think I know or can predict just what these improvements will be.
I also need to listen carefully to their reservations about thinking and expecting that there will be an endpoint where everything will be tied up and no more change will be possible or needed.
Still, I want to hold to my Christian hope, which is always a groundless hope against hope, that not only human hearts but the world and its structures can and must change.
So as a Christian, with a good bit of help from Buddhism, I can offer an answer to Elise Boulding's question. Do you really believe that peace is possible? Yes, I do.
That doesn't mean that when we roll our peacemaking rock up the hill, other rocks will not tumble down into the valley. But I believe that some rocks will stay.
I believe that we can bring more people to realize the true natures as interconnected sources of wisdom, compassion, and justice, and that therefore there can be a little more peace in the world tomorrow than there is today.
And I believe that this is so because my personal experience has led me to trust what Jesus and Buddha have announced, that our deepest nature is the Buddha nature of wisdom and compassion, and that the anti-connecting spirit that animated Jesus is still alive in the world.
But even if someone was able to prove to me, as I don't think anyone can, that peace is not possible, that things will never really change, that all rocks roll back downhill, even then, as Buddhism has helped me realize, I would still continue my efforts to be peace and to make peace.
Why? Because that's what one does when one awakens to one's Buddha nature, or when one comes to know that it is not I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Happily, I have no choice.
Thank you to my two volunteers, Hui Hui and Zhuo Bing, for reading that very long passage. So I think my comment, first of all, would be that he talks about being peace, like the phrase being peace is something that Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Vietnamese monk, talks about a lot, where instead of just trying to do a lot of okay, so the context is in this book, the author, who is a professor of theology, also did a lot of work, like humanitarian work, in a certain country, and he felt very discouraged because like it was not going nowhere. But I think he was very impacted by what Thich Nhat Hanh said also about being peace. So like it's not just about enacting change in the world. It's also internally, like meditation and like through concentration. Inside you are peace internally, and then you bring that out to the world. So I think for me, like when I took on the Awaken Challenge, it was important to understand that inside I must have peace before I try and enact change in the world. So I mean, this is a bit of a side note from the talk on impermanence. So yeah, do any of you have comments after the reading of that very long passage? Yeah, it's very long, but it's just a short part in a very long chapter. So I will highly encourage everyone to read this book, but it's quite Christian. But he talks extensively about Buddhist concepts. So he tries to link the two together. So I would highly encourage you to read it. You can borrow it from me if you want. But yeah, I hope, so you can type in the chat or you can just unmute and speak. But I hope that, today is a brief like primer into how someone could have blended faith, even though like it's not a perfect like one-to-one metaphor or analogy. I think there's similarities, and the non-dual thinking I have is that like whether it's Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, or other religions, Taoism or Judaism, I think there are strands that hold the faiths together, and it's important to not diminish or dismiss the experiences other people have, because because it was through the embodiment of it's through people who embody each faith, like through Kaicher, who gave me a book on Ajahn Brahm, I think, and then when I had conversations with him and with Li Hui, then I learned what Buddhism was about through the examples of people, not just only from scriptures, which is important also, but like for those who might not be very literate, or for those who might not have access to scriptures, I think it's always people that bring about bring scripture to life and bring the faith to life. And unfortunately, yeah, I think not to be too defensive, but yeah, I think Christians have been a very bad example in Singapore sometimes, or in the world. So it's unfortunate, but I mean, they are human and they are flawed, unfortunately. So, but they don't speak for everyone, and they most certainly don't speak for a loving and kind God. And conversely, there are also people of other faiths who are not very good examples of their faith. But yeah, I think we are human and we are flawed. So I think forgiveness is something that, with my rainbow friends, I was having a conversation with one of them, and she said something I was very stunned by. She said, we all make mistakes, and it's in the Buddhist nature to forgive. And I pre-forgive you for anything, any mistake you might have made. I'm like, wow, okay, that's very interesting. But I think the concept of forgiveness is something that is translatable towards both Christianity and Buddhism. And I never understood that or knew that it was a thing until my friend told me that. Like we had a little incident. So anyway, I just want to say thank you for attending my talk. If you have comments, please unmute right now and say, or put in the chat, or forever hold your peace. And for those who are their first time, if you don't mind, you can stay for the closing ceremony where we just say a bunch of words. It's important words. And we have a closing ceremony. We also take a photo at the end. So we take a photo to remember this lovely day that we all came together. Even though it's impermanent, it was nice to be with you guys. So yeah, I'll hand the time over to Li Hui to do the closing ceremony. Thank you.